This chapter is called The End.
Oh no!
It's close.
Wait!
Let's find out what
Jeffrey.
happens.
Jeffrey.
An ear infection. An ear infection. Jeffrey had an ear infection. I missed the highlight of my year because Jeffrey had an ear infection. Thank God. It could have been so much worse. We spent pretty much the whole night at the local emergency room until Jeffrey's blood work came back around 2 a.m. His white counts were low, but the doctor said that it was probably just a response to the infection. His liver function test results actually looked better than they had in weeks, so this was going to be just the usual routine of IV antibiotics and Philly sickness. Jeffrey would be transported down there at 2 in the afternoon the next day. He asked that I be allowed to ride down in the ambulance with him, and I was willing. They hadn't exactly said yes, but I had the feeling it was going to happen. My dad and I went home to sleep for a few hours and packed my stuff. I collapsed into my bed with my clothes on, and I didn't wake up until after 11 a.m. As soon as I went downstairs in the morning, I noticed the answering machine was blinking. We had slept through a lot of phone calls. There were about 1 million messages from people who had been at the concert wishing us well and checking on Jeffrey's health status. Here's a few that jumped out at me. This is Judy Galley, Stephen's counselor from the middle school, calling. I hope Jeffrey's feeling better. Stephen, I was very proud of you tonight. When I first started working with you this year, you were so angry that I worried about you a lot. And you felt like you couldn't control your own life. Now you have accepted control of your own path, and you're doing a wonderful job helping those around you too. Just remember, Stephen, instead of agonizing about the things you can't change, I hit fast forward. I absolutely knew the rest of it by heart. Hey, Mr. Stoll here. Hope that little guy's okay. Stephen, don't worry about leaving the concert. Max asked me to sit in and cover your parts, and I did. The band sounded great. It wasn't what it would have been with you there, but we all got by. Okay, good night, dude. I'll see you with your lesson tomorrow. Max. Oh, yeah, Mr. Watras. This is Renee Albert. Hi, Stephen. I hope your brother's okay. Hi, Mr. Alper. Hi, Mrs. Alper. Hey, good news. We just finished totaling up the proceeds from the concert. $23,489.17. Stephen, Mr. Watras is going to bring over a check later this week. I hope you let him in. Just kidding. This is Annette. I hope everything's all right there. Stephen? Can you call me when you can about, well, what happened, okay? You know, when you were leaving. I really meant it. I just wanted you to know. It was interesting hearing Renee and Annette right in a row like that. Somehow overnight I figured something out. Renee was beautiful, but she was my friend now. On the other hand, Annette was my friend now, but now she was beautiful. Makes about as much sense as anything ever does when you're talking about girls, right? The day started, I ate and showered. My father drove me to the hospital. I got to have my first ambulance ride. Jeffrey squeezed my hand with all his might for about 40 miles. Good thing my drum lesson was canceled because I wasn't sure I regained the feeling in my hand for a few days. Still, that was okay. I knew that if I hadn't been there, he'd have nothing to squeeze. We got to Philly. My mom met us. Jeffrey got installed in a room. His IV bags got hung. I stayed with him until he fell asleep for a nap, and then I tiptoed out, and I went down the hall to go say hi to Samantha and tell her how I followed through on my promise to her, but when I got to her room, it was empty. The bed was stripped. The next few minutes are a blur. I grabbed that little cord that calls the nurse, and I buzzed nonstop until a lady came charging in. She said in that semi-scary nurse voice, "What's wrong?" My voice came out all quiet and wobbly. There was a patient here. Her name was Samantha. She's my friend, and now she's not here, but she said she's always in this room. Did she get sent home? The nurse looked uncomfortable. Well, and then I knew. She's dead? She died. Answer me! Yes. She passed away early yesterday morning. She wasn't alone, was she? Was her mother with her? Yes. As far as I know, her mother was with her at the end. Was her sister with her? The nurse looked puzzled. Sister? And that's when I lost it. I sat down, I started crying and shouting and pounding the floor. I refused to get up. Somewhere in there, the nurse called for a social worker. Somewhere in there, my mom came running. Somewhere in there, another nurse came in with a wrapped package about 1.5 feet long, addressed from Samantha to me. My mom opened it up in front of me. Samantha had returned my ProMark 5As with a note. Thank you for the company and for the loan. Please think of me anytime you use these, okay? Love, Sam. Oh God, now I would always have 2 pairs of special sticks. Epilogue. Annette sitting to the left of me. Renee's on the right. It's 2 months later and I'm on the outdoor stage at my 8th grade graduation ceremony. We're in those special seats for kids who win the big awards. It was about 900 degrees out. My giant poofy brown gown is sticking to my arms like plastic wrap. But even though the baking sun is slowly laminating me, I'm happy. I've been thinking over this whole year in one gigantic rush, so I'm sure I've missed some key moments in the principal's speech, and suddenly there's an awfully sharp elbow slamming into my ribs. Have we heard this part of the story before?
No.
Do you remember how this story started out? Yes. What I love about this type or this style of writing, the very beginning of this story starts out with Dangerous Pie, and it says, there's a girl to my left, another to my right. Hundreds of colored balloons are tethered down behind me, and I'm baking in this June sun. I'm wearing a brown gown that's sticking to my sweat-drenched skin. Do you remember that part? That's like the very first paragraph in the story. So here's what's happening. The very beginning of this story is actually, really, it's the end of the story. And so now we're caught up in all this story, that much of it, that was all of his memories of what happened during that school year. And I like how Jordan Sonnenblick takes it from the very end at the beginning and then brings it full circle. We hear the whole story. And now here we are at the graduation ceremony.
Is Stephen okay?
Let's read and find out. Suddenly, there's an awfully sharp elbow slamming into my ribs. Clap, Stephen. Annette has that my boyfriend is from space look that I've been coming to know pretty well lately. I snap back to reality and realize that Renee is standing to get her certificate. This year's Outstanding Achievement in Mathematics Award goes to Renee Albert. And as Renee swishes back to her seat, and I must admit, she can still swish in a world champion kind of way. Annette jabs me again, right in the same spot. Okay, I'm up. The Outstanding Musical Achievement Award goes to Stephen Alper. I walk to the podium, take my big handshake, for my big handshake moment as Annette and Renee applaud wildly. I don't swish like Renee, but at least I don't trip over my gown and go tumbling off the stage into the front row. As I sit back down, I have to laugh a little. I may be the only kid in America who ever clinched the Musical Achievement Award by skipping out on his big concert. I guess maybe my biggest achievement was learning that there's more to life than taking the big drum solo. One more elbow jab, and I'm clapping again. I'm especially honored to bestow our first ever Human Service Award to Annette Watson. Renee stands up. She's still clapping at top speed. Annette stops after her handshake and looks around. Just as Renee bends down to elbow me on the other side of my ribcage, I realize that I'm virtually the only person on the entire football field whose butt is still touching a chair. Annette has gotten a standing ovation. I jump up to the standing O is unanimous. Annette starts walking back toward us, and call me crazy, but I think I'm detecting some swishing going on. When she gets back to her seat, she reaches out to hold my hand. We're both totally sweaty, but I kind of like it. Before I know it, I'm getting a tremendous double elbow attack. I jump up as I realize it's time for that hat-throwing thing you always see in the movies. For some reason, I look out into the audience where my family is sitting, and about 33 rows back, Jeffrey has jumped up too. And he's holding the brim of his baseball cap. And at that instant, I throw my cap up. He tosses his. There's this amazing moment when both are just hovering in the air, maybe 20 feet up. I look at Jeffrey, and even though he's so far away, I know he's looking at me too. From here, I can barely make out the 1 or 2 inch of new blonde hair on his head, but I know it's there. Just as our caps start to tumble back down, a huge cloud of balloons goes up. We're all cheering. Annette's hugging me. Renee is pounding on my back. My rents are on their feet too. The recessional music begins, and we all start that shuffling up the aisle thing. When I finally reach row 33, I want to stop and bask in the view of my mom and dad, Jeffrey, and my grandparents, all standing there together for me. But I also know that if I stopped, I'm going to get trampled by the 200 pairs of feet that are trudging along behind me. So I only pause for a moment. Jeffrey runs over to the aisle and slaps me 5. Our eyes look. He starts to speak, and I can't hear the words that he shouts, the clap over the clapping and the shouting and the roar of the band, but I'm a good lip reader. I love you, Stephen. And suddenly, I'm blinking furiously like there's something caught in my eye. Before I have this mysterious vision thing under control, I'm about 20 rows past Jeffrey, so I've missed the moment for a quick reply, but that's okay. I know Jeffrey knows how I feel. I know that in the middle of everything else that's gone swirling around this year, I've been his play buddy. I dropped everything for him. I held his hand whenever he's asked, and as I walked out of the stadium to the grass where my classmates are milling about, wondering which way to start the next big walk into our futures, I think about Samantha. Samantha died without her sister by her side, but she also made sure that Jeffrey would live with a brother by his. And of course, she showed me a thing or two. It's funny. I used to think that having a brother was the worst thing in the world, but now I know that not having him would be the worst. He comes running out of the stadium behind me ahead of my parents and slams into my legs like a 3-foot-tall express train. I turn to him and I start to tell him the words that now, thankfully, I have time to say. Jeffrey, What do you think he said?
Love you.
I think you're right.